What I'm going to do today is I'm going to talk about what Jesus was actually teaching. This is near and dear to my heart. I wasn't here last week to do the Easter service. And actually, I've spent a couple of years in Saskatoon. I was leading the Center for Spiritual Living Saskatoon. And I'm now actually, I guess you could say on sabbatical, but I'm not, because I'm still sort of in discussion and dialogue. And so I'm spending a lot of time thinking about what this teaching means to me. And one of the aspects that really jumps out is Jesus. Now, it's interesting when we think about this word Jesus. I've got a question for you, first of all. So I'm going to fill into the room. So I've got a couple of questions. Who here has a fearful experience of the story of Jesus? Have you had any kind of fearful experience? All right? Yeah, well, you may have heard a story about Jesus that was presented by the church or an authority figure. When I talk about church, I'm talking about mainstream religion. Now, I've been a minister for a while now, and I've been going through these teachings for a number of years, and I bumped into many people who found their way to the Centers for Spiritual Living having had an experience in mainstream religion, and they have got some experience around Jesus that is associated with fear. Okay? I'm going to get into that today, and we're going to heal that. We're going to set the record straight. And then, so the next question that follows from that is, when you hear the word Jesus, do you feel any negative emotion? Do you feel anything that's still there? It's like the word God. The word Jesus, the word God of itself is just a word. And it's harmless. But it's the energy that we bring through our perception related to the word. And that energy is related to our experience, which is related to our thoughts in the past, most often, related to the emotions. It's like we've dropped pebbles and stones into this clear pool of consciousness. And they start to build up. And then when we move and we cognize, we hear or see something, a word, a symbol, we then have a process of recognition, sensation surface, and then we have an emotional reaction. And these teachings are teaching us about how to break that link between the reaction to cultivate a response of love. Okay? So I want to fill in. It seems like there's not many people who have much going on around Jesus. There's a couple of you who are kind of like sitting here right now wondering, where's he going to take this? I'm going to take it somewhere beautiful. Now, after the service, there's going to be a lot of information that I'm going to present in the time that I've got today. I invite you to join me in the sanctuary here for a dialogue. If you've got, and the intention of this dialogue is to allow for a sharing of thoughts that were inspired by the discourse, to ask questions that surface related to your spiritual journey, provide an opportunity to make inquiries about my vision and ministry, and experiencing an enveloping connection of support and love. So I love dialogue. It's a part of my ministry. I'm doing it every weekend in Edmonton, where I gather people together and I'll talk, I'll have a discourse, we'll meditate, there'll be a discourse, and I'll engage in dialogue. And I will engage in a dialogue around any and all questions related to your spiritual journey, what the science of mind means, what I've talked about, the challenges you're having, because that's where the rubber really meets the road. So I invite you to set down any dissonance in your mind that may feel, wow, this is a lot of information, I have to get it all. No. Just know that there is something within me that you might call Christ consciousness, that you might call eternal soul, that is also within you. There's your own individuation of Christ consciousness. We are both beings individuated through this Christ consciousness. And we are speaking at a level where what I'm saying is going straight through to that. There's a direct line through to that truth within you. So don't let your ego mind tell you, oh, I have to understand and get all this. You will get exactly what you need and what you're ready for, because it's for us to start where we're at. Okay, so earnest times in Jesus. Joanne touched in on this on the introduction, and I raise this because if you've been with the Centers for Spiritual Living for a while, you may have taken some classes. And if you've taken classes, you may have a mixed opinion about Jesus. You may have had a mixed presentation. But those of you who are familiar with Ernest Holmes, he wrote a book called The Science of Mind. And that book is the textbook, I suppose, the central book for the Centers for Spiritual Living. And so it being our central book, as it were, the word Jesus is mentioned at least 127 times, and the word Christ is mentioned at least 32 times. Now that's important to understand, because that sits alongside 17% of the science of mind is directly inspired by Jesus. There's a section called Finding the Christ, 14 pages, and From the Teachings of Jesus, 79 pages. The reality is the science of mind is founded on Christian teachings. And if you've shown up in the Centers for Spiritual Living and you have some unhealed past with related to Jesus, this is a beautiful opportunity to heal that, because I'm about to present why. And you might even say that we could be considered a mystical branch of Christianity, much like Sufism is the mystical branch of Islam. Now, the difference is we don't say, oh, that Jesus was attacked by his own father and sacrificed and suffered for the mistakes that we're going to make. We don't say that. No, we don't say that Jesus was this great exception. We say that Jesus was this great example. And in the Bible, there are nuggets of truth in the Bible, but this is a heavily edited document. Even theologic scholars will tell you this. It's an edited document. And what you do read is there are nuggets of truth. And one of the things that Jesus is saying in the Bible is, you too shall do what I've done and more. Now, that part of what Jesus was talking about, that got carried into science of mind, because that's what we're teaching here, that you have this Christ consciousness within you. So, you triggered yet? Anyone feeling anything? It is okay to have an emotional reaction, by the way. The most important thing about emotions is to learn how to accept them, to learn how to be present with them. If you just shove them down and you don't sit with them and hear what they're having to tell you, that's called spiritual bypass. And what will happen is you'll keep suppressing, or you'll either reject and that stuff will drop to the bottom of your consciousness, to the unconsciousness, or you'll reject it and you'll eject it out. And what will happen is these feelings that you've not accepted will show up as lessons in your life, showing you the way back to the divine within you, showing you way back to God. So my advice is get used to accepting the feelings you have surface, because if you don't, they'll come back and they'll bite you. Because it's your GPS system, it's your internal feeling system that is showing you how to return to the divine within you. So, I'm going to explore the traditional understanding of Easter, the enlightenment of Jesus and what that meant, what it means to demonstrate body transcendence, and the experience of Jesus as I sense it. Not these messages of suffering and sacrifice, because those are the greatest misteachings in the history of our known world. Okay, and I'm going to explain what happened around that. It is a very deliberate effort. This is no accident. So what's the traditional Christian Easter? It's a festival, it's a holiday, it's celebrating the resurrection of Jesus. There's this literal interpretation, as I said, where, his father attacked his son and sacrificed his son, and he suffered so that we might be saved. His only begotten son, this literal interpretation that there was just Jesus, and he was this great exception. And, there will be Christians that you may bump into that around the time of Easter are very sad. On Good Friday is a very sad time because he was sacrificed and he suffered, right? The trials of Christ included being made to carry the cross, and he was teaching turn the other cheek. He had these authority figures who were attacking him, and they were seeking to get him to attack back. And all he did was he said, I love you, I forgive you, I love you, I forgive you. He refused wine laced with myrrh, in other words, a sedative of that time. And he was silent as if in no pain, and a soldier pierces his side to make sure he's dead. And then the New Testament says he rose from the dead on the third day. That's the literal interpretation. And I want you to understand there's no judgment in what I'm sharing here. I'm sharing a belief system, and I'm sharing the first part of this is my understanding of the traditional Christian Easter to be able to provide a comparison. So, whenever you read a history book, a book that was written back in history, it's really important that one of my teachers said, you got to read it as if you were alive in the time that it was written. Okay? So let's think about the Bible. Okay, scholars would say that from around 200, just the New Testament, from around 200 and something after Christ has finished his ministry, it begins to be written over a few hundred years. And then in 325 AD, the Council of Nicaea, Emperor Constantine, who's ruling the known world at that time, has gathered 500 Christian bishops together and said, make me a holy book, make me a book, a religion, so that I can control the masses. This is a political effort. And if you've heard about the Dead Sea Scrolls, what happens is those were the discarded gospels that were set aside. The bishops decided, no, that wouldn't serve us and our intention, because those gospels were saying, guess what? The power is within you. You are divine. The gospel of Thomas, the gospel of Mary Magdalene, the wife of Jesus, these were saying, you are divine. You have the power within you. But that wouldn't suit, because think about it. As this ministry grew, so just work with me, just believe with me, just suspend your disbelief if you're not into this idea of the historical Jesus. That doesn't matter. But just think about what the archetype, what the mythology of the story is saying. This ministry has grown, and so did the dissent and fear related to him, because as his influence grew, so did his desire to end the disruption. And now think about what it's like to be a mystic. Now, anyone here, if you've ever read or touched in with any of the Eastern traditions, the Bhagavad Gita, Hinduism, Sikhism, if you've read an autobiography of a yogi by Yogananda, okay, what happens is there are descriptions in many different Eastern traditions in particular that describe what it's like to be enlightened, okay? They describe these symptoms, these effects that you'll see. And one of the things that will happen is when someone has aligned themselves with God, when they are the embodiment of the divine, when they've shifted from victim consciousness to creation consciousness to co-creation consciousness to a consciousness of oneness, where everywhere they go, they know they are in a relationship of love with everyone who shares the world with them. They just see the divine everywhere they go. And so what's happening is they're giving miracles. They can heal, and their presence is grace-filled. And so imagine this mystic that is going around this region, and when you're in his presence, you feel a holy man. You feel that spirit is present, and then you watch him healing hundreds of people. And then you realize, oh, wow, this is an individuated being in union relationship. This is actually what's going on. We are all being. God is being. You are being. We are all being, but we're individuated being. But what's happened is that what Jesus and what any enlightened mystic has worked out is that God is, you know why God is all powerful? Because God is in relationship with everyone. God is in relationship with all. So God knows all that everyone is thinking, feeling, creating, perceiving, knowing. God's in relationship with everyone. And the difference between you and God in this moment right now, assuming you're not of mystical awareness, is that you're not in relationship with all. See, God being in relationship with all makes God all powerful. Okay? But what happens is the union part's important. That's what Jesus worked out, was that the union is that conscious choice to embody Christ's consciousness, to recognize and to cultivate and to release the old thought systems of the ego mind and build a new thought system up, to know that you are in union with everyone. And thus you know you are in relationship with everyone. And thus you tap in to that Christ consciousness. You live from there. And thus you watch your world change. Now, what we teach at the Centers for Spiritual Living is we teach steps on how to get there. So you'll come and we'll teach you about affirmations, how to speak affirmatively, how to speak in the present, how to claim your power. We'll teach you about meditations, how to listen to the silence. We'll teach you about affirmative prayer or spiritual mind treatment, how to use a structure of these 5 steps to really claim what's going on. But if you think about this word union, those of you who are familiar with the affirmative prayer process, the second stage is unification. I would argue that's the most important stage, because the extent to which we enter into union and we unify with that consciousness that is God, we unify with our power, that's when our word is realized. That's when our word is realized, and that's what Jesus has done. Now, the powers that be, they're attached to worldly power. And this is a story of 2,000 years ago, and it's a story of today. Anyone relate to that? You're watching what's going on. There are institutions that are currently in death throes. They are going through a process of institutions of falling apart. There is a change in consciousness on this planet, and a new world is being created. And you are witnessing the dying of old institutions that are trying their very hardest to hold on. And it's very evident in the political arena, for example. 2,000 years ago, the powers that be were the Roman Empire and the Jewish church in the region that Jesus lived in, right? Everyone following me? These are the powers that be. Now, guess what? The Romans have a reputation for wanting to have control of stuff, right? The Romans are occupying. This is a military scenario. You have got soldiers walking around with swords and shields, and they are controlling through fear. Now, the Jewish authorities, the Jewish church, they are a means of the Roman Empire to help control the masses. So they are working with them. Both of these institutions felt threatened by his message of power within. You too shall do what I've done and more. You too, just learn how to correct your thinking. Just learn how to recognize that if you bring the mind in union with the heart and you feel love. Now, at the time, the Jewish teachings, they'd spent 1,000 years on transitioning from believing that God was in the Temple of Solomon, having the Babylonians coming in and sack that temple, take them as slaves, and they had to reinvent their religion. So they've only just worked out how to actually worship around the kitchen table. But there's a whole bunch of ritual, law. And along comes this Jew called Jesus who says, let me teach you about love and forgiveness. And what he did was he mastered storytelling. He mastered storytelling for two core reasons. The first core reason was that in telling a story, what you do is you're able to subvert the powers that be. He was able to walk beneath the radar to a certain extent because he wasn't saying illegal things. He would tell stories about the prodigal son, and he would tell a story about the vine. All these stories. But what they were also doing, these were stories that were bypassing the ego mind's defenses, that conditioning of the time. Just imagine what it was like to be alive 2,000 years ago. And the technologies that you experience today, there's nothing like that. There's a hunter-gatherer. Agriculture is somewhat new. You know, the wheel is a bit of a novelty to certain extents. And here's someone's coming along after you having said, or you've been taught about ritual and obeying authority and having been occupied, and you being told, no, your power belongs to us. And he came along and he said, no, your power belongs to you. That was a paradigm shift, a massive shift. And that's why it's so important to understand the politics of the time. So, I was here a few weeks ago, and I shared this. See if anyone here remembers it. I now have 2 rules by which I live life. Anyone remember rule number 1? Love everybody the same. And rule number 2, forgive myself when I forget rule number 1. See, that is what I believe Jesus was teaching. Right there, that meme I put together is probably the simplest explanation of the teachings of science of mind and the teachings of Jesus that I've come up with so far. Because my ministry is to break it down, to make it as simple as possible. Because by making it simple, it's accessible, and you can make this yours, and you can take it into your life. You can understand how to apply it. And when you do, oh yes. So love everybody the same and forgive yourself when you forget to love everyone the same. He knew that the spirit and the human self were one, and he knew that there was this wholehearted desire. He knew that by cultivating a wholehearted desire, what does that mean? That's when you have an awareness of one heart and one mind. You've probably heard one mind in the science of mind. My number plate on my vanity plate is one mind on my car. All right, I've had that for about 9 years, so I'm big into one mind, but I've been working out about one heart. See, that's where the love actually is. I know the creative process as we teach it is like a rocket ship. Your mind is like the guidance system, and your emotions are like the fuel. And guess what? If you are all clear about where you're going to go and you've programmed your guidance system, but you've got no fuel, what happens with a rocket ship? Sits on the launch pad, right? Or if you've got tons of fuel, but you haven't calibrated your guidance system, you've not really worked out how to think, what happens to the rocket ship? Brace for impact, because that rocket ship will take off, but who knows where it's going to go. So the creative process is about understanding how to use thoughts and feelings. So that's why a wholehearted desire is so important. And this is what he realized. And when he realized this, he became aware of the laws of creation. So I want you to think about some of these symptoms of what a mystic is and what they're doing. Could it be that he could see into the matrix of life and heal? Could he see auras? Could he see light? And could he see darkness within you? Understanding that thoughts and feelings become things. And when you have these thoughts that you keep feeling of fear and absence of love, that becomes a block, a darkness, an absence of light within your body. And he could see into that body, into your body. And he was working with non-physical entities, such as Abraham Hicks does, such as any channel does. And he was communicating with unity consciousness. And so he would be informed as to what was going on in the consciousness of the other person. And he could see into the physical body. He understood that this physical body is actually just a shell of an invisible space, surrounded by visible surroundings. And he knew there was no boundary between space and space. Could it be that he could multiply objects, loaves and fish, as yogis have done, as the Eastern mystics have done? Could it be that rather than actually walking on water, he was in a cave meditating and he wanted to speak to his disciples, and so he projected? This idea of bilocation and projection, written about in an autobiography of a yogi. These are Eastern symptoms of enlightenment as we understand them. Could it be that whilst he was on the boat and there was a storm, that what happened was he understood that the weather that we experience is actually influenced by the collective consciousness? And when we enter into fear, and what we do is we fuel that storm, and so he extended love and he calmed the storm. Could it be that this is what he was doing? That he just knew that the spirit and the human self were one? He knew that the physical world is an ego dream, and he was teaching how to raise consciousness, how to experience the variability of separation within the constant of wholeness. So here's another meme. I live within the constant of wholeness, even as I continue to experience the variability of separation. The constant of wholeness is the divine that you are. That's the love that you are that is ever present. The variability of separation is the choice that you've made to incarnate in this three-dimensional world so that you might learn how to experience aligning with love. You might have an experience of learning how to align with love. See, when you make transition and you're done with your life, Spirit is going to have a conversation with you. And the question's going to be, so what was it like learning how to align with love? And the currency of Spirit is experience. And the things that you've earned, the Egyptians got it very, very, very wrong. The things that you've earned, the gold, the cars, the status, the houses, none of that won't mean anything. No, Spirit will only care about the currency of experience. And we'll ask you, so how did that life go? What was it like learning how to align with love? And your soul will be bare. And you will be in joy and in unity consciousness. But you're experiencing the variability of separation. So Jesus was on the holy mountain. He'd fully resurrected the power of his mind. True prayer must always be love and forgiveness. And he knew that a new idea about death had to emerge. See, what was being taught at the time was death was a very, very scary thing. I also believe that Jesus' existence, his ministry, the purpose of his life was to herald the end of the great experiment of separation. And that I do believe he was here to demonstrate in a way that the Buddha hadn't demonstrated. Anyone familiar with the Buddha come along 500 years before? Buddhism was the result of that. He taught about the law of cause and effect. He unraveled the wheel of karma. That's what the Buddha did. But what Jesus came and did was unravel the wheel of life, of love, and showed the resurrection was possible for the first time. And there's a new idea about death that could emerge. There's this great illusion that there are two certainties in life, taxes and death. Well, guess what? Both of those are wrong. Because if you never, first of all, from a tax point of view, I understand if you never register on the tax rolls, they won't know you exist. Okay, that's number one. And number two, no, death is not a certainty. It's only a certainty the ego mind. That's what Jesus was teaching. We're not here to die this painful death to get old. By aligning with love, we will regenerate. By seeing love all around us all the time, we will be lifted, we will be empowered, we will be enlightened. So, what was he also teaching? Focus on leaf. Those of you who like to take notes, this is a nice little mnemonic for you. L-E-A-F. I like to talk about the idea of turning over a new leaf. These are practices for spiritual living. So, the first one is loving kindness. See, what he was teaching is that loving kindness is, love is that attribute-less aspect of creation. Love is everywhere. Love is fueling all creation. Love is what binds this all together. When you speak an affirmative prayer, that which fuels it is love. Make no mistake. And jumping into affirmative prayer whilst you're feeling triggered, perhaps you need to meditate. Because loving kindness is what he was teaching. He was also teaching equality. See, what he knew is that in the mind of God, in the heart of God, we are all equal. We are all the same. You know, think about 2,000 years ago that there was this belief that I don't believe has changed too much, which is if you have more money, more power, more status, whatnot, that somehow you're blessed by God. Well, doesn't that particular false belief serve the ruling elite well? Because now if you are more blessed by God, surely you've got more authority. And what Jesus was coming along, he was teaching, no, we're all equal. We are all the same. We are all here on this information gathering adventure of learning how to align with love. Acceptance. So we're to the A. See, what he was also aware of, and I'm aware of, is that there's free will. Free will is a core part of the laws of creation. So guess what? You are all going to awaken. At some point, everyone you know, every life, every being, from the most, what you would judge or discern to be terrible person, to the most holy person, we are all going to awaken. The free will part is how long we're going to take, how many lifetimes we need. That's the free will part. You can take as long as you want, and God will be there. God will wait patiently. And so acceptance is understanding that. Acceptance is understanding that we all have free will, which means don't be looking at other people and judging their journey. Don't be thinking about how they should be doing this or that. Let those of you without sin be the ones to cast the first stone. And he was really saying, no, there's no need to cast a stone at all. There's no point, because when you do that, you forget the fact that they've got free will. This is their journey. Who are you to selfishly suppose that you've got a better way of doing it? You've never walked in their shoes. You don't know what their life, their experience is about. You don't know the lessons they've come here to learn. And every time you look at someone who has this appearance of suffering, this country that has this appearance of suffering, a child that dies when they're a year old, understand that that's not one life. That's an eternal soul that came here to learn lessons. And their lessons may have been to die at a year of age, or to be a part of a genocide, or to be sexually abused. I understand that that's their lessons. They're an eternal soul. And understand there is free will. Oh, yeah. Yeah, let's give a hug. You're loved. There you go. You better? Yeah. We're all having free will. A little godling there. Free will. Needed to express. Learning about the power of the cry. We all have power. A child, a baby learns about their power by crying, and watch the parents come. That's power. So the question is learning how to understand what real power is. See, that cry is an ego-based power because there are physical needs that the baby has. But there are also emotional needs the baby has. So sometimes they cry because they want to be held. So acceptance is understanding free will, and then forgiveness. LEAF. Loving kindness, equality, acceptance, forgiveness. You live by those 4 practices, those practices for spiritual living, you'll change your life. That's what he was teaching. Jesus knew that to invite God to take the place of illusion was about embracing the world in forgiveness without exception or reserve, knowing that, forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do. He knew that we have to set the course for consciousness with our eyes, our ears, our hands, our feet, our voice, our willingness. We must see with the eye beyond the eyes. We must see through the eyes of love. See through the heart. We must hear with the ear beyond the ear. We must hear the truth. We must hear God through us speaking. Our hands and our feet are carrying us in the direction toward love, and our hands are that by which we act in the world. And our voice, how blessed I am that here you are, blessing and honoring me with listening to me for this half an hour to share these words so that I might share, so that I might grow. How blessed I am. Thank you. And for all of this, there need be willingness because we have free will. Beneath your challenges, bad thoughts and feelings lay wisdom showing you the way home. Beneath your challenges, bad thoughts and feelings lay wisdom showing you the way home. You are always being shown the way home. He was teaching that you are not a body. The crucifixion was a teaching that he was not his body, the death is not real, the resurrection and recreation, and that death was the most magnificent of opportunities. He was showing his disciples he'd overcome the physical. He had no intention of the Christian church or Christianity. He was teaching many, many disciples, many. This body is not real. And imagine, for most of the crowd, he's just another badly behaved criminal. But to his friends, to his disciples, how moving this event was. And now some more than 1 billion people, nearly 2 billion people, in this day still are following the teachings through the Bible, the edited version. Sacrifice, however, was a mistaken interpretation. Why? Because the Eastern yogis are telling us that with enlightenment comes the ability to have the consciousness leave the body. Sadie wasn't feeling anything. He was in communion with unity consciousness. What do you think infinite intelligence is? What do you think unity consciousness is? What do you think of the idea of astral travel is? There's signs of this type of abilities of enlightenment that are all around us. He dematerialized and rematerialized a new body. He didn't die. This was a new idea about death. He was done, and he had learned how to manipulate the physical to the perfect degree. He was God in the fullness of power and form, and he just rematerialized his body. He was the first to do this in this particular time-space dimension. And he showed himself, his reaction showed various understanding. Not all of his disciples got it. But Mary, she waited outside the tomb for 3 days. And then she came back and she saw, wow, he's gone. But then he showed himself to her, and she was the one who understood. She got it. He was living the example life. She was living the nurturing life. There are two paths in this world. There's the path of Jesus and there's the path of Mary. She was living the path of Mary. Unfortunately, over the past 2,000 years, and this stems back to the Roman Empire and their patriarchal emphasis, there's been an imbalance between the masculine and the feminine. And that's being reclaimed. Partly because people like me are saying, balance your masculine, your feminine. Understand that that nurturing power, we're actually all walking toward that consciousness of Mary. Needing to go through the consciousness of Jesus and live the example life is actually just a stepping stone to the consciousness of Mary. That's actually the ultimate. So the guys that are all into the patriarchal stuff got it so wrong. And the guys that are understanding and struggling how to connect with their partners, with their wives, they might need to look at how they're looking at the feminine, how they are looking at the woman that is in their life with them. That's what I've done, because I'm God-informed, coming together with God-informed, and that's the purpose of relationship. But that's not how we've been trained. And so, imagine the world that Jesus saw. And as awakened mystic, Jesus went willingly into this experience to prove his teaching. He knew what he would be subjected to. He had a triumphant entrance into Jerusalem, fully aware of what's to come. He cleansed the temple to consciously fan the flames of dissent. He wanted to provoke the Jewish authorities into putting him into front of the Romans. That was an engineered event. He was very aware, and his Last Supper showed the transcendence of time. He was saying, I know what's coming. Get ready for it. It's going to be one ride. It's going to be a ride like you've never seen before. And so understand the power of his words. Forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do. For as he's being nailed into the cross with metal spikes, he looks up. He looks at the Roman soldiers and he looks up and he says, forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do. Their ego minds have been conditioned. This is all they know. They don't know what they're doing. And next to him, there is 3 of them are being crucified that day, 3 men. And Barnabas is next to him and feels that grace, feels his presence and says, I get it, I get it. And Jesus looks at him and says, today you will be with me in paradise. In the moment of his crucifixion, he is recognizing the God in another, and that other is recognizing the God in him. Namaste, hey? Being crucified and saying namaste, can you imagine that? Wow. And Father, in his final words in that initial carnation before he rematerialized, Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. For he knew where he was going and he knew what he was doing. And so the call to action is this. Look upon your own life and ask, where am I crucifying myself? Because you see, here's the thing. Life should be joyous, happy, creative, and loving. So go out today. Be joyous, creative, happy, and loving. And you know, Gandhi, you may have heard the saying, be the change you wish to see in the world. I took a little liberty. I kind of like tweaked that one because there's not quite enough for me. It's true, but there's a deeper truth, which is be and feel the change you wish to see in the world. Only a patriarchal emphasis could miss the feeling. Be and feel the change you wish to see in the world. See, that's what will create a new world that we're ready for. And demonstrate what joy, appreciation, and love look like. Always respond with love, but remember that this must start with self-love. So your ability to love others is directly constrained by your ability to love self. You are learning how to love by first learning how to love the self. And so, have a blissful day and let your heart go with mine and heal the world wherever you may go. I love and I bless you.